Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Anti-Racist Education Roundtable, Building Anti-Racist Schools, a conversation in imagining schools where every Black and BIPOC student is thriving with our guest, Dr. Daryl Howard, Mr. Joe Truss, and Dr. Henry Turner. My name is Kirsten, and together with my sister Lynn, we are the creators of the Anti-Racist Table, which is a multi-dimensional platform that we created to help bring anti-racism into life as a daily practice. We created this platform because we felt like we wanted to do what we could to try to help bring change in America. And we do that in large part with our free self-paced 30-day challenge. Our challenge is foundational anti-racism work. It includes education about lesser known facts, historical facts about our common and shared history in this country. We reckon with emotionality. The challenge creates empathy, and it helps people really figure out what anti-racism looks like and means for them. I don't know about you, but I have come in touch with a lot of people who think that they're anti-racist, or, yeah, the people who did the Capitol coup, they need to do the challenge. A lot of people feel like they put out a sign or they read a book, and that's all they need to do. But these same people are showing up in workplaces, they're showing up in schools. And when this topic comes up, they're not doing much. They don't want to look for systemic racism. They don't want to look at the legacy of anti-Blackness. And that's really where we are as a nation. And so we invite people into our challenge to do this work. You can do it alone. You can do it in community. We have groups of people doing it. It's self-paced. We have 30 curated lessons that are comprised of reading, podcasts, videos, art, music, poetry. We also include meditation, reflection, journaling, nonviolent communication. So all the tools you need to have a safe space to do what we recognize is really deep inner work. And what we've heard from our participants is that it's transformative going through this experience, and it's very in-depth. It's not like the traditional diversity and inclusion training that has been around for the past 20 years. So with that, we really want to encourage people to check out our website. We just upgraded our platform to make it easier for people to use and to self-pace. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, who is going to do our land acknowledgement. Thank you again for being here.
Hello, everyone. And before I do our land acknowledgement, I just want to note also that on our slide, you can see that we have accountability letters. They are free resources that you can use. Kirsten's going to put the link in for the Hold Your School Accountable letter that we have that you can use. A lot of the things that we're talking about today are things that you can learn a little bit more about in the accountability letters. So I encourage everyone to download that as a free resource. So now I'd like to share a land acknowledgement that's inspired by Ruth King as we work to repair our relationships with the Indigenous communities in the area that we live. I'd like to call on my ancestors to stand with me as I acknowledge the Native custodians of this land, Washington, D.C., and the Anacostan people, Piscataway people, those people that are named, unnamed, known, unknown, past and present. We honor all traditions and traditional custodians of this region, and we recognize their continued connection with this land, with this water, and with this community. We pay respect to the earth, whose generous resources sustain us every day, and we pay respect to the enslaved African people who were brought, held, and sold here, and all of their descendants, and all of the people throughout the world who are living in captivity. We pay respect to their spiritual labor. And we pay respect to our ancestors whose unwise relationship to race and racism we have all inherited. We pay respect to our teachers and elders, past, present, and emerging, and to all of the young people today who are teaching us. We honor this gathering and our special guests for taking the time and energy to be with us today. May we recognize that we all share an aspiration for liberation, to be free in heart, mind, and body. Ashe, here ends our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Lynn. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So first we have Daryl Howard, Ph.D. Daryl is an equity instructional specialist whose work and research interests include race and cultural proficiency, social emotional learning, and the triumphs and challenges of African-American male students. As a member of Maryland State Department of Education's Task Force on Equity and Excellence for Black Boys, he researches and recommends policy and practice to disrupt harmful narratives, decrease disproportionality, and elevate achievement. Howard is instrumental in the work of the Building Our Network of Diversity, which is the acronym is BOND project, where he leads initiatives focused on the recruitment, development, and retention of male educators of color, as well as empowerment of underserved male students. Howard is the author of Complex People: Insights at the Intersection of Black Culture and American Social Life. You can follow him on Twitter at Daryl Howard PhD, and you can also find him on Medium. And now we have Joe Truss. Joe is committed to dismantling white supremacy culture in schools. He brings 16 years of education experience and originally grew up in San Francisco's Tenderloin neighborhood. A first-generation college student, he graduated from UC Berkeley before attending Tufts University, where he earned his teaching credential. He began as a high school Spanish teacher in East Oakland. After attending UC Berkeley's PLI program, he started school leadership work and now has been the principal of Visitacion Valley Middle School in the San Francisco United School District for 6 years. There, he has worked to grow project-based learning, restorative practices, and reading intervention. In 2018, he started his blog, culturallyresponsive.leadership.com, where he writes about school leadership and racial equity work. He also offers workshops on anti-racism and provides team coaching. We're going to put the links to everybody's website that we've mentioned. We're going to put the links in the chat and also in the email with the recording to this talk today. But you can, his website is culturallyresponsive.leadership.com. And last but not least, we have Henry Turner, EDD. Henry has nearly 15 years of experience as a high school administrator. As a principal, he is most proud of the work at both high schools to empower students to fight hate and bigotry while strengthening their school community. Since the events of the summer, the schools have been determined to fight racism and all forms of hate in the school. This work has led to developing anti-racist teaching practices, incorporating culturally responsive instructional practices, and changing structures and systems in the school to address systemic racism. He speaks nationally and locally, sharing his experience, speaking about race in schools, technology, and education, and creating change to narrow racial and economic opportunity gaps. He also advises school districts and educators in this work. In 2020, industry news site K-12 Dive named Henry Principal of the Year. We're going to circulate a link where Henry has a newsletter on social justice leadership, and we'll circulate the link so that you can find him there and sign up. And with that, I want to welcome our panelists. It's wonderful to have you here today at this moment we're in history, and There's a tremendous need for this work. And we just want to kick off right the bat with, if you imagine a school where every Black student is thriving, what would it look like? What would that look like if for that to happen, for all Black and brown students to thrive?
So I'll jump in. So good afternoon, everybody. Daryl Howard here. And first, let me say thank you for the invite to the table here to have this conversation. Glad to be here with Joe and Henry. My first time getting to meet these gentlemen. But the title that you mentioned sounds familiar. I have a workshop centered around that same idea for boys, and it's Imagine a School Where Every Black Boy Was Doing Well. And what I ask people to think about is, how do you think differently? How do you teach differently? How do you engage differently? Those are the three areas. So number one, you are learning about your biases. That's number one. Number two, you're leveraging how those students learn culturally, or if we're talking about boys, we're talking about how boys learn specifically. And lastly, we're talking about loving students like they're your own. So I think about those three things. When I'm trying to imagine, I'm trying to get other people to see how they need to think differently, instruct differently, and engage differently. That leads to that space that we are all imagining.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Similarly, and thank you for having me. I would focus on the word that Daryl was talking about around love, is that students would feel that they are being loved by their school. And what that looks like is a lot of is laughter, kids feeling like they have the risk to try different ways of learning, and that there's no punishment for their risk taking, that they are that, you know, I work with teenagers, and so as teenagers they are treated as if with teenagers that they're going to take risks, that they're going to push the boundaries, and that they know that their family, their school is going to love them and support them. And also is that when they fail, is that they're not going to be known as black people failing, that they're going to be known as just a person that made a mistake, a person that, and they're going to be brought up and picked up by that. When they succeed, they're not going to be known as just one of the few, but they're going to be known as one of the many. And so that they feel like they are part of the community and not and not something that is unique or rare.
All right, I'll add to that a little bit. Appreciations to everyone joining us and the invitation to be a part of this. I think it's hard not to start with the opposite, right? But it helps, right? So I think what we normally see is, if we're talking about Black folks, we're talking about anti-Blackness, right? So we see a hierarchy, right? That either is experienced or you know, prevalent in the policies and the treatment and the curriculum. And I also, the concept of the white gaze also comes to mind, right? This, which kind of gets into stereotype threat, right? And all these things of how Black and brown children show up based on how they're treated, how they think they're supposed to show up, and the messages they've internalized. So the opposite of that are all these great things, right? It looks like joy, right? I love the laughter piece. It looks like curiosity. It looks like inquiry and genius, you know? But we're not accustomed to seeing that. So we almost don't really know what it looks like, but I can rewind and think, where do I see that even as a Black person? And I see it when I'm just around people I feel comfortable with, right? So it looks like comfort, it looks like belonging. It just looks like freedom, you know. And I think when those are the elements, everything works is way out, right? The learning happens, the exploration happens. But yeah, I feel like joy is the word, you know, just joyful learning we talk about, right?
Yeah, I love that.
About this, you know, what would it look like? So we know kind of in the curriculum, you know, that we want to kind of follow an abolitionist teaching approach, changing and dismantling kind of what is being taught. But what would it look like? Because again, unless this is mandated, it's not going to really change. So like Henry, from your perspective as a principal, someone that's not in the classroom, how can we create mandate, at your level? What would that look like in a classroom, in the school, so that it would be kind of enforced? Because each teacher is not going to necessarily focus on their bias. We know that bias, is real, and people don't leave their biases at the door. So how can we make this a reality? We can talk about this all day, but like, what are the steps that we need to do on the highest level at a school administration to make this happen?
Well, I mean, I think to look at our school, about a third of our Black students feel that they are connected to an adult or a student in their school right now. And we have about 85% of white students feeling connected. And so when we look at what do we need to do, we need to develop a sense of trust with those students. And I agree with what Joe and what Daryl was starting with, is that it is hard to even envision what this looks like, because these students have brought, again, I'm working with high school students, they have been brought through a system where they've been taught to not trust the adults or their classmates. And so the only place where I would push back a little bit on your question is that, like, I think that if I went in there as principal and said, well, I'm going to turn this ship around, then I'm demonstrating in many ways the white supremacist culture, which is that a single person, a leader, is going to overhaul a culture. And it really has to be democratic, it has to be collective, it has to be collaborative. And one of the challenges that we face is that 80% of teachers are white, where more than 50% of students in public schools right now are Black and brown students. So we have to, and so if this is the demographics that we are dealing with, then we need to create a culture that is collective, that is supportive, that is really focused on this work. And we need to be hiring more people of color. I mean, that's like the heart of the matter, is that we need to be hiring more people of color in this work. But for the people who are in this work now, is we have to do it collectively. And I think that part of the problem is that we've looked at administrators and said, and looked to them to overhaul the culture, and they've tried, and it's actually, it's failed. We've got to do it collectively.
I'll pop in and build on that as a principal as well, to say the same thing. It doesn't matter who is running things and if they have the best idea or if they're spitting the gospel. People are still people, and no one wants to be mandated to, right? There's a small group of people who are fearful of the mandates and the punishment. That's a small group, and and we need mandates for that, of course, because there's some people who only respond to that. But most of the people, they want to arrive at that revelation themselves, right? They want to learn. So I think you do need two things, okay, right? So to bring kind of Kendi into the space around anti-racism and policy, some people follow the policy, right? And some other people find ways to kind of work around within the policy. So some things do need to be mandated until we get to a place where people have the capacity built and the mindset shifted to do whatever we deem is the right thing, right? Cultural relevancy, responsiveness, humanizing, whatever, all those good things. So we do need this idea of mandating, you can't kick kids out for defiance. You can't kick kids out for not having a pencil and not having the materials. You cannot do that. But it's not enough to leave people out and just say you can't do that, right? We got to build their capacity. But as I think about, if we were to follow that short-term immediate plan of policy shifts and mandates, we have a whole system of metrics and checks and balances that yield our current outcomes, right? We have exams, and we have pacing guides, and we have standards, and we have evaluations of teachers. And we have evaluations of schools and money tied to that. So there's a whole set of mandates that yield the current set of outcomes. If we built in equity and justice into all of those spaces, we would be walking more in line towards that, right? That's immediate. The long term is shifting people's mindsets and building their capacity to do those things and build curriculum that is responsive, right? Have relationships with kids that are humanizing and communal and collectivist, right? But that's the much longer haul, right? The mandate, it's not going to shift because we had mandates for lots of things that didn't shift things in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But you do need both, because some people will say, if I'm not being mandated to do it, I'm not going to do it, right?
So if I could jump in and just as for some context, again, I'm an equity instructional specialist, so I am not a school leader, but I work with school leaders in this work around race and cultural proficiency in school buildings. The language of mandate can be challenging, nearly problematic, in that when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about we need to be doing two things simultaneously in schools. Number one, we need to be building the capacity of the staff to understand what this work of anti-racism is. Like, a lot of people are asking, what does it mean to be an anti-racist school, an anti-racist leader, anti-racist teacher? What are anti-racist teaching strategies? Anti-racism is equity work. Anti-racism is culturally responsive practice. Anti-racism is social justice work. It's just a language that presupposes that racism exists. So it's much more intense when people hear it and people understand. If you're walking into a building and the leader says, this is like, this is an anti-racist space, they know straight up that they presuppose that racism and inequity exist, and we're rooting that stuff out in this building. So we got to build your capacity to have that mindset shift. But additionally, there needs to be some things that are mandated. So if there's culturally responsive practices that I'm looking for when I observe you, I need you standing at the door when your students are walking in the door. I need you to know your student's name. I need you to not overly discipline individuals based off of some type of minor infraction. I need to know that there was some restorative practice that took place to restore that relationship. So there's a number of things that you can look for that will fall underneath of that mandate umbrella, but you need to be simultaneously building individuals' capacity to have a conversation about inequity. And I think that's what needs to be happening simultaneously with anybody who says that there's a mandate about this work.
Could I just add one thing to that? And I think that, like, the learning has to be focused on student-centered, right? And so one thing that we've done is we've started to identify what are the anti-racist and social justice skills that we want students to develop. And that's been the focus of our learning. And in fact, we've created a seal to be placed on the student's transcript around social justice leadership, pushing away from the GPA as where a lot of students have been focused on, but actually what's the work they're doing in their school to create change. And I think that as our vision is, if we can get our teachers to buy into the idea that the job is to empower students to create change in their school, then we are helping our students to develop skills as they move into the workforce, as they move into becoming teachers. But I think that the work that we need to be thinking about, I was thinking about this as Joe and Daryl were talking about, is our work needs to be student-centered. And so we have to reduce the power hoarding, both at the administrator level, but also at the teacher level, so that the students feel that they have ownership of their school.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I just wanted to ask, do you feel like it's really important to center, because I know we talk about, we want to certainly cultivate like positive Black identity for all of the Black students and really empowering them to see, the excellence that lives in them. But are we also focusing an anti-racist white identity in the white students so that they recognize that they aren't superior to others because the curriculum is not, exposing them to Black excellence, or is there something that you're doing right now that's that's supporting that kind of positive white identity?
I'll pop into that 100% for a few reasons. One is, last I checked, there's a lot of white people in the country, right? And they occupy a lot of space, and currently they occupy a lot of positions of power and have a lot of wealth concentrated in their pockets. Stolen wealth for sure, but currently have it. So if there's not enough folks of color to shift everything that's happening, right? So at some point we do need to build the mindset of white folks to be anti-racist, right? Yeah, they need, of course, they need to love themselves. They need to love themselves, not in putting anybody else down, right? And to get in touch with their culture and their history and realize that they're settlers on this land as well, right? So that is, of course, needed, because a lot of times when we do this equity work, we think it's about saving Black children and doing something just for the brown children, right? But no, like pacing guides and exams and lectures are dehumanizing the white children just like they're dehumanizing the brown children too, right? So good teaching is good teaching. Folks of color will benefit more from it because they're feeling it different, and they don't have access to the things that white as much access as the things that white folks do. So that is definitely needed. That's a different set of work that white people need to figure out the conversation they're going to have with white children and doing their own work.
So yeah, I agree that that needs to be driven in that type of affinity space to say, what do we want to do to contribute to this moment, to this movement for social change. But additionally, so with the bond project that I work with, we have what is called the Bond Boys Learning and Leadership Institute, and that is open to all of the students, all of the male students, grades 4 through 12, who are in our school district. And when I say all of the male students, that means not just Black and brown, even though they may benefit most, and I'll tell you why in a second, but it's open to white, to Asian, to all other racial groups. And the reason why we have it situated that way, and this is led primarily by male educators of color. And so the reason why we have it situated that way, because if you come into that space, you're going to have the experience of looking at things through the lens of a male educator of color, and largely your peers who are male students of color. So there's learning that's taking place that may be different than what is typically happening in one's classroom. The other piece I would add to this conversation right now that we're having is, I've been in workshops, I've been in professional development sessions where I've heard white people say, I feel bad for being white. I feel ashamed for being white. That's not where I want you. That's not where I want you. Like, God created all of us in the skin that we're in. God created us all to be uniquely different. The only thing that one needs to have is a higher level of curiosity about the imbalances and inequities that exist in our society that advantage you versus disadvantage others. And that's what one needs to have a hyper level of focus on, so that they are aware of how they can counterbalance these things that we're trying to disrupt, as it relates to inequity in society.
Yeah, I think the first thing we've worked on as a school is to identify that whiteness is a culture, and that white culture has been taught to not talk about race. And so we need to talk about race. So what we've incorporated is the racial identity development levels for students to be able to talk about and understand their racial identity. And the highest level of racial identity is to love your own culture. And not because it's superior, but because it is the culture that you've been brought up into. The other thing that we've worked on is to help students to understand some of the policies that we're dismantling, particularly the policies that are seeking to sort students. So like leveling, grading, and why we want to be a school that is focused on learning and love, and less to be a school that's focused on sorting others. And I think that that's where really the hard work is with a lot of our students, particularly our white students, because they've been brought up in a system where it's about competition, and that they have seen themselves thriving in school in comparison to their students, their classmates of color, and they haven't thought about it. And so when we, for example, we have some courses where we've disrupted the leveling process, and we now see students interacting with each other. And they said, we have not been in class since elementary school together. And they had not thought about that, right? And so it's about engaging with students around these conversations about why have they been separated in their school system, and why are they so focused on grades, GPA, things that seek to separate them. And I think that initial work is going to help us to get our white students to help be enablers to, or help to empower them to help dismantle the system as well.
So could I add just one last little piece to that? So I think the challenges, and I love that you all are doing some work around racial identity development. I think it's important not only to have individuals exploring themselves, but exploring how society works. Like I'm a sociology major. I teach sociology still to this day. It's the way I see people. It's the way I see institutions. But I think unless they're exploring at the same time the way in which, like when we talk about anti-racism, we're talking about the opposite of racism. We're talking about, and that pushes back against expected norms around like meritocracy and rugged individualism and ultimately like American exceptionalism. And like people have been like, we've all, not just white people, we've all been so brought up into that understanding of America that it's like finding out that the world is flat. And so that's part of the challenge, going back and forth between the individual and the institutions and helping them to recognize that America is not all that it has has touted itself to be. And it does have challenges. It does have greatness as well. I'm happy to be here. But it's just the idea that America is not perfect and it has work to do. And some people have a hard time grappling with that, even greater than grappling with these things and challenges, biases that they have on their own.
Henry, you mentioned something about 1/3 of the Black students, only 1/3 of the Black students feeling connected. And I just wonder if, having that kind of information, if that garners you more buy-in with, teachers to actually understand that, you see here the numbers are, most of our Black kids, our students of color, don't feel connected. We're missing something. Just because, the topic that we're talking about, all the things that we're talking about, just how people struggle to accept this information, to do this work. Do you find that presenting that kind of information really helps?
So we shared that data about 4 years ago, and I would say that right now I'm really proud of where our faculty is. Faculty are in this work, and absolutely. I mean, it tugs at their heartstrings when they see data like that, and we also have to make sure that data leads to a story. And so what we've also done is we've had students present to our faculty to share their experience of what that really means. And when they talk about being pulled to the side by a teacher, by a white teacher, and feeling like they're being intimidated or called out, like our students now feel comfortable to share those stories in front of the whole faculty. And I think that has helped to move our faculty even more in this work. So I think, as I said, we started sharing that data a few years ago, and it's helped to move them along. I think the stories have helped to move them even further along.
Yeah, the stories, I think, well, go ahead, Lynn, did you have something?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to ask if you guys could talk a little bit more about, you talked a little bit about equity and grading, and we did a conversation with Joe Feldman a few months ago. And that was really interesting to hear how we have to really reimagine the way that we grade and what is the goal of assessment. And I'm just wondering what you guys are thinking about assessment and how we can change the way that we look at grading, because right now it's not really to inspire people to learn. It's really, you know, to put you, like you said, in a box. Okay, well, you're smart and you're not, and you don't get it. So what are different ways that we can kind of address that and bring more equity and some sort of justice in that area of grading and assessment?
I'll pop in real quick. I mean, I think Joe's book is great. It's a great place to start. We have to get back to what the purpose is, though, right? So like the purpose of letter, I mean, I don't know. My interpretation of the purpose of letter grades is to sort children so we can decide who the diamonds are and who's the rough, right? What school they go to, what class they get to, what jobs they get, and how much access to the castle that they get. And somehow it's racially and class-wise disproportionate, right? So therefore, the system that we're using doesn't work because those continue to be the outcomes. Now, if the goal is different, if the goal is about giving children and folks feedback so that they can know better how they're doing and decide what they want to learn next, right? And really cultivate their genius, right? To borrow Goldie's title, right? Is if it's about unlocking and cultivating their genius, that's different, right? Then it's like, oh, well, look, hey, let me tell you all the things that are good about what you're doing, right? And all the things that you know and all the cultural capital that you bring, right? And if it's about them, the learners deciding what they want to learn next, and you just being that, right, that guide on the side, right, to support them in that process, it's a whole different purpose, right? But the whole castle needs to come down, right? Because if it is just about deciding who gets to Yale and who doesn't, the whole system is shit, right? But unless we decide that it's not about that, and we're not worried about trying to keep up with somebody doing something, we're going to stay on that path, right? Because as long as that's the end of the line, everybody is bought into that system until we say it is a completely different purpose. So we're going to give kids narrative feedback. We're going to have conversations with kids, right? We're going to let kids give their own feedback. We're going to let kids self-assess, right? I mean, it's a whole different power, flipping of power dynamic, right? Which gets back into white supremacy culture too, of sorting children and who's right, who's wrong, who's at the top. I mean, you'd have to let go of the entire system.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. I think you just listed in the last sentence or two that where the key challenge is, right? The idea of hierarchy, the idea that I'm in charge of the class, I have the knowledge, and I just give it to you, opposed to how do we build learning together? How do we collaboratively make you a better individual, while simultaneously, even as the adult, I'm becoming a better person as well. We're not looking at it that way because we're still stuck in that idea of individualism and hierarchy and so on, which prevents us from thinking like that. So there has to be exposure to why there are other ways to teach and learn.
And I think that school has just moved so far away from that the purpose of its purpose, which is for students to learn. And so, you know, what I experience is that the day that GPA comes out for students when they start to apply for college, that is a day where they are constantly looking at their GPAs to compare each other. And, you know, what I've experienced is that for many students who have grown over the course of 4 years, that they become disheartened in their junior and senior year because, you know, I feel like we've been successful with them, but yet they feel like a failure because they came into school and they struggled, and they feel like all they are is this number. And I think that we need to rethink school so that school is what its original purpose was, which is for students to learn. And whether it's written feedback, or there are ways that we can develop rubrics that are ways to provide consistent feedback for students, to help them learn, to help them grow, to help them understand, and for us to reward their grading. During COVID, we've restructured our grading to incorporate three practices: performance, process, and progress. And so that became sort of the expectation in all classrooms, that students would be assessed in those three areas. And lo and behold, the students who progress the most in our school are students of color. And yet, when we just look at their GPA, they have we have many students of color who have lower GPAs. And so starting to reward students for the growth that they make, and then the thinking that they are doing in the process of the learning. And I think that, we need to move away from grading just being that you take whether you do the homework, you do the test, participation. We have seen teachers have participation where students get 65% of the grade is participation, or 10% of the grade is participation. Well, if a student doesn't feel safe to participate in the class, they're getting a lower grade. They don't do their homework, they get a low grade. And so thinking about, so it's performance, progress, and process. And so thinking differently about about the feedback that we give students is focused on the learning and less on just the quantitative outcome. And I would just say one more thing is that, what I've experienced with as a teacher and with teachers is that grading is very personal, because it's something that we create. And but yet I've heard way too often a teacher say, I don't give the grade, the student earned it. And the teacher is the one that creates this algorithm to say, this is the way that this is how we determine learning in my class. And so we need to really think about that grading is about giving feedback and determining student learning, as opposed to it being an outcome.
So someone asked in the chat about the narrative that it's hard to find Black and BIPOC qualified teachers. Can you speak to that? And I think that everybody across America, Black people, especially in the schools, keep hearing the same thing.
First we have to say that that's built on deficit thinking, right? Off top, right? The idea that folks are underqualified is deficit thinking and is racist from the beginning, right? Right, to use one set of metrics that yield the same outcomes. If we have a set of metrics that yield the same racist outcomes, then something's wrong with the metrics, or something is wrong with the conditions that are leading to the folks meeting these metrics or not meeting these metrics. The other piece is, I put this in the chat, like the wealth gap, man, I grew up studio apartment, middle of the inner city, like with no money. And for a long time, I wanted to be a doctor because I love science, still do. But that was one way that I thought of like being paid compared to living where I was living, right? But the wealth disparities, right, is so real that like just a generalization. But if white folks generally have more wealth, then you can be broke. You could be a broke teacher. Because maybe you got that nest egg that's going to allow you to put a down payment on a house. Or you could stop teaching, go back, hit up money bags and go do something else, or go use your white privilege and go get a job and do something. That's a different reality. That's a generalization. And yes, there's poor white people as well. But this idea of what am I going to do? Like when I got to college and I was poor and I was around a lot of middle class and upper class people in college, I saw what they were doing. The other poor people, they were all deciding to do things that they were going to get money. Okay. And folks of color predominantly are lower income, right? So that part is real too, to say like, why don't you didn't start with money, so why don't you go get hella degrees and go make no money, right? I mean, that's a hard sell. So you need a much deeper passion to kind of to dislodge that, right? What people bring is not valued too, right? I mean, what folks of color and what Black people bring is not valued because we've been looking at this through a very white normative lens. So back to the whole system's got to be redesigned, right? And we need more access to high quality education in brown, poor neighborhoods as well, right? That's a condition, right? But that isn't to say that there aren't people still with some serious skills. And we bring them in to do all the special stuff when the teachers can't do it, though. When the teachers can't teach the kids, whatever it is, they bring in all these people that happen to be brown, whether they are teachers' aides or security guards or after school. They bring all these people in because they got skills, right? But we decide that those skills don't matter enough to navigate this system that's set up.
So back to the bond project. So the bond project is like, that's what we do. Like, our focus is recruitment, retention, development, empowerment of male educators of color across the country. That's our goal. And to Joe's point, I completely agree that the wealth piece, the salary piece, all of those things make sense. Like, why would I go and get a 4-year degree? I already know the struggle. Why would I go to college to go back into the struggle? Like, that doesn't make sense. The other side of that, though, is a question that I always ask folks when we do presentations about recruitment and retention is, when is the last time you asked a Black or brown boy what do you want to do when they get older? You would be a great teacher. Like, when do we ever encourage them to say, you know what? You're persuasive, you're articulate, you're brilliant, you're organized, you're a leader. You will be a great teacher, a great professor, a great principal. We never say that. We never say that. Until I begin to question myself on that, I realized I never said it to a kid. And so, like, these teachers aren't going to come from nowhere. Like, we can't just snap our fingers in human resources development. Folks are going to have a line full of Black and brown men waiting to sign up to be teachers. So we have to plant seeds. And that was one of the original ideas behind our Leadership Institute for Boys. Like, if they have positive interactions with us, maybe some of them will say, you know what? I want to do something that improves society. Maybe that's teaching, maybe that's law, maybe, I don't know what it's going to be, but that puts it on the table. And we have to begin putting on the table more and more. So shout out to all the people who are dropping knowledge in the chat here on this particular topic, because it's all real talk. And so I would encourage folks, that they have a sincere interest in looking at how to bring in, and more importantly, to retain teachers. Take a look at bondeducators.org. Take a look at bondeducators.org.
One thing I would add is that when our students of color don't feel connected in school, why do we think they're going to want to become teachers? And so the work, I think that the part of the big problem of our culture is that we think that this can get solved tomorrow, and that this work is not going to get solved tomorrow. And so we need to invest in our retention. So it was great to hear Daryl talk about the retention of teachers of color, because teachers of color are leaving, and they're going to be leaving more so this year. And so we need to think about retention. And we also need to think about investment in our current students, because they are going to be, we need to think about them becoming the teachers. In Massachusetts, 10% of people coming out of grad school, education schools, are people of color, 10%. And so to think that we're going to be fighting over this small population of people who want to become teachers is just not the solution. We need to invest for the long term.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll jump in. Can I say one thing? And if you're a kid, if you're a student of color, a person of color, which allows you from a sociological perspective to see the code in the matrix a little bit better than white folks can see it, why would you sign up to go do that, more of that to more children, if you believe that an education system is not designed to do that, right? It's not. Now you could go to a school that's innovative. That's different. That's a very small amount of schools that are doing project-based learning and outdoor education and all that kind of stuff. That's a very small number of schools. Most of them look like sitting in rows doing worksheets. So why would you say you should go do more of that when you've seen that on an intimate level, right? But I love that piece of encouraging kids, right? Like, because when I talk to young people, I say, I want you to be a teacher so you can go like blow this shit up. We need you to do that, you know, like we need you to go fix it because it's broken. Like, don't come and do anything else. But teachers aren't saying that. They're encouraging folks who want to keep the trains on time and keep the status quo intact. Those are people who get encouraged. So you look around and that's what you see in education, especially in leadership, right? People who are maintaining power and privilege for the same structure that we have.
Yeah, I'd have to say, as a teacher, as a Black teacher in a predominantly white school, I mean, I think I'm the third Black teacher in 50 years of this particular school. I mean, and just walking into an environment that's just steeped in white culture, I mean, it's aggressive, and you feel like you're, you know, almost getting spirit murdered every day, just like Dr. Love says, that, you know, they don't create a culture where you're, you know, encouraged to grow, encouraged to stay the course. You know, there's so much turnover in Black teachers because they just don't create an environment that nurtures their excellence. And just, yeah, I'm just wondering, Henry, what you guys are doing to support your Black teachers to thrive.
Well, just thinking to what you said, Lynn, that, you know, some of the harshest feedback I got from some of our Black and brown teachers was that, you know, this racial identity work that you're doing with the faculty, this is elementary. And it was true, is that we had geared our racial identity work for our white teachers because they were the ones with the lowest racial identity, right? Lowest levels of racial identity. And so that helped us to really reframe what we mean by racial identity and making sure that the work is for all teachers at all different levels. And so I think that was important. One, that I heard them, and two, that we helped to make changes to make sure that the work was engaging for them as well. I'd also say one more thing is that the affinity space that I think was just mentioned is something that we're definitely, I think has been a powerful place for our teachers of color.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Paula, who dropped in the chat. The New Teacher Center is working to help with development and retention of teachers of color. She dropped the link in there, so definitely check that out too. If anyone,
you want to ask them about parent community and what role, you know, what do we need from non-Black parents in the community to move this work along or to get buy-in? Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
I was just talking to myself out loud. The question you were saying from parents. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, parents are the voters, right? In school districts, right, and state, depending on the resolutions, right? So we need them to be conscious, right, and racially literate, and all those things that we need in our young people and our staff, because they're the people who are going to either vote in that direction, right, for those policy changes, or they're going to be the ones to try to hold it up when we're trying to do the work and be at the school board meeting protesting, or be in your office yelling at you, or whatever that is. So we need them to come along on the ride too of this racial equity work, especially at the mindset level first. And I mean, we also have to be very explicit about where we stand and what we're trying to do. A lot of times in schools, school districts, even teachers, we're trying to do this bullshit neutral approach to, like, well, we're here, we don't want to say it, we don't want to upset the people. We just got to say, this is what we're about. And then say, if you want to learn, there's some spaces to learn, right? There's some parents, you got your white parents. We got some white parents, they're doing a white racial affinity club, and they're reading Stand from the Beginning for kids right now. If you're a Black parent and you want to advocate, they're doing this, you can join that group. But we're moving. right? Just like we sometimes as principals and leaders, we roll out a vision to our staff and teachers to the kids. We don't necessarily always explicitly state that to the parents because we're scared, because we've been conditioned to think that we can't be, I don't know, caring about people's dignity and humanity, right? But I promise you that if you say that, you're gonna get some parents that are gonna be upset. You get some parents to say, okay, cool, help me. And then, because we need them to support, we need them on the back end to work with their kids at home. We need them to have those conversations at the dinner table, because they're gonna raise little Jimmy that's gonna grow up to go be a senator one day and be voting on policy too, right? And they need to all be with it. And this idea of saying we're just gonna stay out of that, that's not good enough, right? Staying out of that is what we have in this current society. You know, we need it on all angles.
So yeah, and I'll add to that. And again, I'm not a school leader, I'm not a school principal, but the most successful professional learning that I've held in schools has been with leaders that, like what Joe is describing right there. Like, there is no place for neutrality in this work, right? Either if you're a leader with integrity, then operate with integrity. Like, what racism and inequity needs to survive is silence. Like, just be quiet. Just keep on doing everything the way we normally do it, and it will continue to exist, continue to grow, continue to flourish. But once you call it something, once you say this is what we are addressing as a school leader, this is what we're doing in this building. I can Andrade, I believe is his last name, talked about not culturally responsive teaching, but community responsive teaching. Like, the idea of meeting the needs of that particular community. If you have a largely white student population, then you cater the way your school is going to operate to, with the same intentions of anti-racism and addressing inequities, but you recognize your audience. Same thing with the audience was different. So you have to kind of move with the community that you're working with, because you need them. But it starts with school leaders. No work moves in schools from the bottom up. It really, well, I can't say it doesn't, but it struggles to move from the bottom up. A school leader determines the type of equity work that's going to be happening in that building.
I think we're going to all be at a really challenging moment, a telling moment this spring. And I would say for our school, I'm really proud of how we responded to COVID. But we've got a lot of criticism from some families because we haven't moved fast enough to attend to the needs of our white affluent families who want us to race through our curriculum so that they can get a 5 on the AP. We've been really focusing on making sure all students are moving along, feel supported, have what they need. And because of that, we've gotten criticism. And I think what we're going to see, I think we're going to see around the country, are families, particularly affluent families, saying, well, we're going to private school, we're out. And we either need to say, and we either are going to say, oh, come back and we're going to gear our school towards your, you know, your needs as affluent families, or then leave, right? Like, those are the choices. That's the choice we need to make. And, you know, I think that what we need to stand by is the work that we've done to support all students. And I worry that as the politics starts to go to the school committee level, school board level, when families start saying, the schools that paid attention to low-income families, communities of color, ELL families, the more that they paid attention to them, we're leaving, that it's going to put pressure on school boards to really put pressure on school boards to put pressure on administrators. And I worry that's going to create greater inequity in our schools.
I feel like you're saying, it's probably, it sort of feels like everything we're talking about when you look at what's going on racially in America is that things are going to get worse before they get better, honestly. That there's so many areas where it's just, we have a lot of things to work on, a lot of things that need to be rebuilt, to use Joe's, language, that the system's not working.
Yeah. I just want to talk or ask you guys about the weathering of Black students and what you guys are doing to kind of support the social and emotional wellness of Black students. That might be different now during COVID, and what you think has been kind of the takeaway that you've learned from the past 9 months with COVID, and like what would you take from this and like bring it into the future for the fall? Are there any things that you feel like have really helped? I mean, I feel like now assessment's totally changed. Like you were saying, Henry, you guys are changing the way that you're assessing. You know, you're going to keep that going for the fall and like expand upon that.
Sorry, that can you hear me okay? One thing that we're doing in term that I'd say right now is we've been asked, whenever we get asked what are we doing for Black History Month, we've been focusing on our Black students taking care of themselves and us taking care of our Black students. So we're not doing anything publicly as we may have done, where our Black students actually would do a lot of the assemblies in honor of Black History Month. We've just been honoring that this is a month for them to take care of themselves and us to support that work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give a glamorous answer. I think we're failing at that, you know, system wide. We were failing before though, so we're failing worse now. But that's okay to be realistic, right? To say what is needed, right? I mean, I think if we can't even see the children and can't be with them, there's a lot of missing gaps, right? There's some holes there. So which is why people are in a rush, in a race to get back, because we know that could be a little bit different if we can actually be in some similar space with our kids. So I mean, but I think changing some of these structures helps, right? But we need to continue with that, whether that is having self-directed learning, you know, getting rid of standardized statewide tests, doing more block scheduling and deeper learning as opposed to, you know, whatever else we normally do in traditional schooling. Those things are still going to apply. I think those things help Black students more, but I also feel like because we were losing before, it's not like they said, well, let me dig in and engage even further in distance learning. You know, I just don't, that's not logical, right? So it is about trying to get better when we get back, you know. I mean, that's my realistic answer.
And Daryl, I just have a question for you. With the work you're doing with the Black boys, what does your program look like? And you know, you were saying that you work with the different schools, and you have an equity department, right? So that's got funding and other things that you're working every day on equity. What does that look like? Because that would be kind of a good model for other schools to take up. I don't know, Henry, if you've got an equity, you know, if you've got funding for equity work, you know, it's like, or is it just like you give a little bit of money and you do a few things each year? Or is this a year-round funded department?
So I guess I'll answer it this way. I work in I believe it's the 10th largest district in the country. 160,000 plus students, 20,000 plus staff members, and there's 8 of us in the equity unit. So that tells you how effective we can be. We are hopefully, you know, my favorite word is we're hopefully moving the needle with some schools, but we certainly cannot get to everybody, and we certainly cannot can meet the needs that exist in every building. It's just impossible. This work needs constant attention, and that's why it has to start with. That's why we always start with leadership teams, so that hopefully it will filter down to the larger staff and then to into the students. And we recognize that we're one of the better districts in the state around this type of work, which is challenging to even recognize after having just said what I said. So that's why we decided to create spaces, the affinity spaces for the male educators in our district. That's why we decided to create this affinity space for boys in our district. When we're talking about social emotional learning, like we could talk to students who have said after on January 7th, how many of your teachers talked about the events of yesterday? 60, 65, 70% said my teacher didn't say anything. Some of them said that they did. So of course, we're going to hold a session to talk about what that was and what it meant and how it came about and what's it mean going forward, because we have to create that space. So where spaces don't exist, you create them.
Yeah, that's how we've been rolling with this as well. So we don't have any particular funding, but our professional days has been every professional day and every faculty meeting has been focused on this work. And to the insurrection at the Capitol, you know, we had built the culture that we had an emergency faculty meeting the next that morning. And so, yeah, there's no outside money that's supporting us, or you know, we use our professional days, our faculty meetings, you know, pushing in any collaborative work that we can. And we've built a culture where this is work that we're constantly talking about it every day or every moment. I know, I think that we've seen progress now that because we're seeing teachers talking about this work at the lunch table, which is where we know that teachers learn the most is at the lunch table. So, you know, I think that that's where we've leaned into.
Yeah, co-sign all that. We're doing it in-house. There's not a lot of funding for it. I'm in my 6th year at the school. Like, I don't even lead it, you know, like the teachers leading it. They're figuring it out. They're leading their own racial affinity groups. White folks are leading the white group. But it took a long time to get there, you know, and that's a set of conditions that have to be set up. But, you know, they should be free to be professional development leaders too and not be teaching full time. And that's a whole other conversation. We shouldn't just, you know, make lemonade out of lemons, you know.
So Lori asked, how do you create a collective unit around this work if there's an element of resistance within the faculty to review their bias or to not buy into this curriculum? She says that she works in a district that has a small group of teachers who have been very vocal against anti-racist curriculum. What advice do you have for people in that scenario?
Go ahead, Joe. All right, I'll jump in. So, I mean, I just think that's a sign of the time, right? You have a 1619 project. Then what do you have following that up? You have a quote unquote 1776 commission. You have leaders in the country who are saying multiculturalism is not something we do in the United States of America. How do we even I can't even process some of the things that have happened over the last 4 to 5 years. I mean, not just studying this all my life, but just the last 4 or 5 years. And then within this last year, with compounded with COVID, like, expect the unexpected, expect pushback, expect 74 million people to say, I don't, one person in the professional development said, I just have a problem with the word anti-racism. Can we use something that's more, I don't know, get people on board? And I said, are we having that conversation? Like, we can't use the word anti-racism. It makes you uncomfortable. Like, either you are or you aren't, and that's okay. Like, you're going to sit where you're going to sit. But the idea that we're struggling with the language and the pushback is just, I mean, it's just a sign of the time. So I think we deal with the pushback. Again, if this is the work we're committed to doing, you go in there with this is where we are. This is not going to be, should not be a hard conversation. It will be, but it is what it is. It is what it is.
All right, I'll jump on that. You know, one, stop thinking about them. That's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing to do. Stop listening to them. Hardest thing to do, because they're so loud. They take up so much airtime, and they got a lot of institutional hooks to hang their hats on. You know what I mean? Like, they got so many things they can reference to say this is why they're right. But we got to stop planning for them, right? You got to plan for the folks who are with the program and flip the middle, 100%. And this is also counterintuitive because we've been trained to not do this. Got to go harder, right? Because they're going to be resistant to the soft shit too. So don't waste your time talking about superficial things, because they're going to fight that too. They fought diversity when we started talking about diversity. They fought cultural competence when we were talking about cultural competence. So they're fighting white supremacy as we're talking about white supremacy. But at least now we're talking about white supremacy. Now we can be clear with the, oh, you're fighting against white supremacy, so are you for white supremacy? Then we can have a very specific conversation. But go harder, go be more explicit, be more deep, have higher expectations, demand more from everybody, right? And be more explicit with what you're standing for. Because they're gonna fight it either way, right? But now when they resist, it's clear what they're resisting, and then the middle has to decide, right? They've been able to flip the middle by not having the conversation and fighting every inch of the way. So stop asking for inch. Say we want the whole mile, right? And then see what happens. Now it's gonna be ugly. It's gonna be ugly, but we'll get a lot more of the middle that way. And some of those folks who are resisting, they're going to resist their way somewhere else up out of there, right? But they can resist comfortably right now.
But if I could jump in real quick, Henry, just because it started like, that's the beauty in the word anti-racism though. Like, it's nothing new. Like, people are like, oh my gosh, anti-racism is this new brilliant thing. No, it's equity work, it's culturally responsive work, it's social, it's just having conversations about race. But it's making people choose. And like you say, you get to have a specific conversation. Are you against it? Or are you just saying, like, there's no place for that middle space. There's no middle space anymore. It's either you're against it or you're silently complicit, either one. So it's making people make a decision.
I'll just empathize with the people who feel like they are on their own in their school district, and that you've got to get out of your school and find people who are part of your community who will support you. Recently I was asked by a teacher where the majority of the faculty were calling for Blue Lives Matter and saying that it's not racist. And she was trying to fight that it is racist. And it's like, you need to stand your ground and say it's racist, but you also need to find your outlets of people outside your school to support you if you feel like you don't have that. And I think, I don't want to speak for all of us, but I think in the places where we feel like we've done some work, we also feel our spirits being murdered at work as well. And so, know that it's happening to all of us. But I also want to just, when you feel like you are the only voice in your school, that is hard. You need to find your outlets outside of your school to support you.
We are out of time, and this has been an amazing conversation. And I just hope everybody watching that, as you're doing this hard work, that you follow these guys. They're all doing things and having programs, and you can go to them for support and encouragement. Because I just love, anyway, the idea, it's time to go big. And we have the reason right there. Joe is holding why it's so important. Yep. It's the future. So we just want to thank everybody for joining us. And if anybody has any last words, because I know we're a little bit over time, but if there was anything you guys want to plug about your work you have coming up, where people can find you, any of that.
Yeah, we need to go hard. We need to follow in your footsteps. What are you guys doing? What do you want to share?
So for me, I'll jump in. Again, thank you all for inviting me. I appreciate being involved in this conversation. To my brothers here who have participated as well. Nice again to meet you. I just wanted to add that these conversations need to continue. On May 15th, the Bond Project is having their annual academy. So we have over 50 speakers who will be sharing. We're looking at 2 days. Ticketing will open up within the week. So stay tuned to that. I'll put the website in the chat. But if you want to talk about anti-racism, if you want to talk about social justice and hip hop, if you want to talk about Black boys, if you want to talk about all the ways in which male educators of color impact learning spaces, that's the conference that you need to attend on May 15th.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'll jump in. For me, check me out on Twitter at Truss Leadership or culturalresponsive.leadership.com. Everything I do is on there, whether it's workshops. I got a bunch of stuff planned for the spring, a Dismantling White Supremacy Culture workshop. You know, the words I'll leave folks with is, you know, the door is cracked right now. It was re-cracked over the summer. So we need to kick that shit in, you know, like we know what time it is. We know what we're asking for. So let's stop asking for crumbs, right? Let's ask for what we're asking for. We want the whole pie, or at least a slice. We want a slice. We want to be able to eat as well. And I think, you know, we all have some privilege. We need to really cash out the privilege that we do have. Some of us got more than others, but we need to stop being scared and waiting for the right time. Use the privilege and push for what we need to push for.
Exactly. And also, I think just, you know, we need to all get into the habit of not just digesting and taking in more information and, you know, thinking about it intellectually, but actually start to act, like actually start using this stuff and, you know, have our work not just be performative, but just, you know, action driven. That's, I think, the difference between anti-racism. You're actually really actively doing the work, not just learning about it. But I did put in a link for a Black Lives Matter at School panel discussion that's happening tonight at 8. If anybody wants to join it, it's with the Sarah Lawrence College, so you can find that there.
I was going to say, people can find me on Twitter at TurnerHJ, and I just started up a newsletter and creating some videos for the newsletter with colleague Kathy Lopes, and the next video will just be about how to create a culture with staff around anti-racism around your staff culture. And I think that is really the important work right now. Go back to the fall when people were putting black boxes on their Instagram because they were supporting this movement and they've now fallen off. We need to grab them and help them get back into this work. So I posted the link into the chat. Do it again. Feel free to sign up for the newsletter and we can connect. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will send around that information, and we also want to tell people, check out our challenge. You can bring it to your school. You can get your whole community doing our challenge. They can do one lesson a week. It is transformative. It's deep, deep inner work. Yeah. We have some great events coming up. We have Dr. Rashawn Ray. You have seen him on everything. He is blowing it up.
On every newscast if possible. Yeah, and we're going to be talking about reparations and what that looks like.
And then we've got Sonali Dev. You know, we're all about humanizing and seeing, you know, humanity in others. And we can do that with fiction. And then we've got a workshop around dignity and anti-racism using this dignity model created by Dr. Donna Hicks. And then next slide, we've got a family challenge. Go ahead, Lynn.
A family challenge for families. It's almost finished. It's for families from kindergarten, actually birth to 3rd grade, for them to do. It's 30 lessons on how to become anti-racist, how to kind of plant the seeds. But it's a lifetime journey. And you can follow us, on Instagram, Twitter, FaceTime, Facebook, all of those things. So thanks for joining us. And
if you would like to support our work, we do this work because it is a labor of love and a passion because we want change, but you can also support our work by buying us a cup of coffee if you want on our website.
Yes.
So thank you to our panelists. It was an honor and a privilege to have each of you here. And thank you for everyone for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.